Hello everyone and welcome! So this video has two parts. In the first part, I will show you how I painted this galaxy background using watercolors. And in the second part, I will make a shaker card using this background, and the shaker card will be in the shape of a balloon. You can follow these steps using other shapes as well. So let's get started with the background. Here are the products I used: the usual watercolor supplies, watercolor cardstock, brushes, paints, and at the end I will be using a white gouache to create the stars. You can find the product list over on my website, but you can use whatever you already have or is in your budget. To paint the background, I used a pink for the middle and a mix of blue and black for the outside parts. I also used a purple just to try it out. I didn't like it, I didn't like the shade of the purple, so I will be painting over it later. And actually the mix of pink and blue will give you purple anyway. I started with the wet on wet technique, where you apply wet paint onto a wet cardstock. I applied clean water over the whole paper and then I dropped in blue and pink around the middle, keeping the middle white. For the middle, when I was thinking what kind of shape I should create, I was playing with the idea of creating a pink circle, but for some reason I find painting galaxies rather intimidating, not sure why, so I kept my original idea, something I already tested, a diagonal line, white in the middle and pink on the outside. But you can definitely try different shapes. If I were doing this again, I would not do the wet on wet technique and just do the wet on dry, meaning dry paper and wet paint. This is not because I was using a cheap wood pulp paper. The only issue I noticed with this paper was that when I was using a paper towel to lift the color, some of the fibers lifted as well. But this did not bother me, and you could not see it at the end anyway. The wet on dry technique is just easier to control, and the wet on dry is what I did on the additional layers. So try out the wet on wet technique, try out the wet on dry and see what you like the best. So this first layer I started with the blue and the pink, then I dropped in the black and also purple, which, as I said, I did not like and I will be covering it later. And I let the paints do their thing, mix with the water, mix with each other. This was just a light base layer and I purposely made it very blotchy and uneven. Once I was happy with the look, I dried it with my heat tool, but you can also let it air dry. Moving on to the next layer, I did here the wet on dry technique and I used a mixture of black and dark blue. I was applying the paint in a dabbing motion to create really nice texture. I used multiple brushes, mainly not to contaminate the paints, and also because the middle part was smaller, I felt using a smaller brush was much better. When I was applying the pink, I first applied it at the edge where the white part starts, and then when I was done with the pink part, I combined it with the blue at the top. This was because when the colors combined, they created a purple. A very nice purple, but I only wanted to have the purple as a transitional color between the pink and blue. After I was happy with the look, I dried the panel with my heat tool. For the last layer, I made the color really saturated, so I did not use too much water. I worked from inside out. First, I started softening the edges of the paint in the middle. I just used a damp brush and painted across the middle, which softened those edges. Next, I used the pink and made the color really vivid. Then I combined it with the blue at the top, which made it purple. And lastly, I added black. Only black, not the blue. The blue is pretty much optional. I actually could not decide if I want black or blue. And as I was applying the black, again I was doing it in a dabbing motion. I left some spaces without any paint so you can see it underneath. You can actually make bigger gaps so it's more visible. This layer I let actually air dry, just because in the meantime I ate lunch, and then I worked on the last step, which is creating the stars. For the stars, I'm using a white gouache. You can also try white acrylic paint. On this palette I have a gouache that is dry. Once I squeezed way too much and I didn't want to throw it away. I added water to it to make it more fluid, which is something I would be doing with a fresh gouache as well. Then I dipped a damp brush into it and splattered droplets over the background. There are a few ways how you can create a splatter. Here I just did the typical dabbing on the brush with my finger. The size of your brush and how wet the brush is will affect the size of your droplets. If you have more water on the brush, the droplets will be bigger. I like to use this specific brush for splatter. It's Dollar & Rowney size 4. I splattered the background until I was happy how it looked, and I think it came out very nicely. I'm actually very happy with the look. So that's the background. Before I move on to the making of the cat, I just want to thank to all of you who subscribed to my channel. Especially in the last few months of last year, I got so many new subscribers, so welcome to all of you, and big thanks to all of you who come back and watch my videos. And now let's make the shaker cat. I really wanted to use this die set with balloons. It's very old, it's from Simon's Stamp, but I checked and they still have it. I bought it when I started card making. The first year I made 3 separate purchases on Simon's Stamp, and I haven't shopped there ever since. It's just not worth the hassle when shopping from Europe. I started by creating a cardstock frame for the shaker element. I put 2 of the largest dies together. I made sure they are aligned and I secured them with a washi tape so they don't move. I run them through the die cutting machine. I'm using here a cardstock that I use for my card bases. You can use whatever cardstock you prefer. So I have the die cut frame. The issue here is the inside bottom part. You will see the foam tape, so I will have to cover it up later, which is not a big deal. I also die cut the back of the card using the biggest balloon. Then I die cut the balloon from an acetate, which is for the shaker part. I of course die cut the background galaxy panel. I forgot to mention I used a slightly bigger cardstock for the background. Normally I use A6 size for my cards, but because the balloon was slightly bigger than that, and I also wanted to tape the panel to prevent warping, so I had to use a bigger cardstock. I die cut one more balloon. This is just a guide from a dotted paper. I will be creating a fold on the back panel, and this helped me to align it and make the fold straight. Now let's assemble the pieces. First I adhere the acetate on the back of the frame. Before doing that I also trimmed it a bit, not by much, about 0.5 millimeter, just so you don't see it on the sides. I used a liquid glue and I applied it over the whole frame, and then I placed the acetate on top of it and let it dry. Next, I made the fold on the balloon that is going to be the back side of the card. I used my template to make sure the fold is correct. Because I used a dotted paper, it helped me to align the top and the bottom of the balloon, and with the bone folder I created the fold. Here I made a side folding card. I tried top folding as well, thinking it will stand, but it doesn't. So for this card, I decided to do the fold on the side. The front panel with the acetate was dry, so now I can work on the shaker element. I used a double-sided tape, and to have more space inside of the shaker so the shaker elements can move, I doubled it up. and then I cut it into 3 thin stripes. I had to cut additional tape because I cut the first piece way too short, but that's okay. The most important thing is that you don't leave gaps between the tapes. After I was done, I picked a few beads and sequins. This is just what I had in my stash. Most of them I have no idea where I bought, in a craft store for sure. I used the beads in each color, pink, purple or lilac, and clear. I really like to use beads for shaker cards because they are quite small. And I only used the sequins in the big jar because I think the colors were the best for the background. Next, I took the balloon with the galaxy background and I carefully put it over the shaker pad. I did not fully press down until I flipped it over. Next, I attached the top shaker pad on top of the back white panel. I used a liquid glue, which I applied over the fold, and then I placed the front panel on top of it. There were still 2 things missing: a greeting, which is optional, and I needed to cover this part at the bottom where you could see the double-sided tape. For the greeting, I picked a simple happy birthday banner and I adhered it on the side. And to cover the bottom part of the balloon, I die cut a few stars out of a silver glitter cardstock. 1 big star and 4 small ones. And I adhere them on top of the frame. And the card is done. I absolutely love it. This is exactly what I had in mind. Here you can see how it looks like when you open it. Plenty of space to write your wishes. If you would like to see more galaxy background ideas, check out these 2 videos on your screens. One is Pink Galaxy for a card for Valentine's Day, and the other one is created with distress inks, where I blended the inks and I did a little bit of ink smooshing. So that is all for this video. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you in my next video.